Before we begin this story, please be advised that it contains mature themes, including psychological suspense and unsettling mysteries. Viewer discretion is advised. Imagine silence. Not just quiet, but the kind of profound, crushing silence that swallows sound whole, that presses in on you from every direction. Now imagine that silence, miles beneath the ocean's surface, abruptly shattered by a frequency that shouldn't exist. A ghost in the machine. A voice from the dead. Deep in the vast, inky abyss of the Pacific, nestled precariously on the edge of the Mariana Trench, was Triton 7. It wasn't much to look at. A cluster of reinforced titanium modules, tethered to the seabed, powered by a small nuclear reactor, and designed to do one thing: listen to the ocean's secrets. For Dr. David Miller, a marine acoustics specialist, Triton 7 was his world. Most nights it was a world of predictable hums and clicks, the rhythmic pulse of the deep. But not tonight. Tonight, a rogue signature appeared on his console. A faint, almost imperceptible blip, swimming against the usual aquatic cacophony. David, a man whose patience was as deep as the trench itself, initially dismissed it. A sensor glitch, perhaps. The deep ocean was a master of optical illusions, and its electronic equivalent. He ran diagnostics, purged the filters, recalibrated the hydrophones. But the blip remained. Persistent. Insistent. He isolated the frequency. It was a modulated burst, a specific pattern. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. This wasn't a whale song or tectonic plate shifts, or a distant deep-sea vent. This was artificial. And it was a distress beacon. A Class A distress beacon, identical to those mandated for all deep-sea research vessels and submersibles. His fingers trembled slightly as he ran the cross-reference. The database word, then spat out the impossible truth. The signal's unique identifier matched the Odyssey. The Odyssey. The name alone was a legend, a tragedy whispered in hushed tones across every maritime community. 5 years ago, the Odyssey, a marvel of American engineering, designed for unprecedented deep-sea exploration, vanished without a trace in the Challenger Deep. A catastrophic implosion, the official report concluded. No survivors. Just a debris field scattered across miles of ocean floor. A monument to human ambition and the ocean's merciless power. Now here it was signaling. From its grave. David stared at the screen, his mind grappling with the sheer impossibility. The Odyssey was gone. Destroyed. Reduced to fragments. How could it be broadcasting? He ran the analysis again a dozen times. Checked every parameter, every line of code. He even slapped the side of the console, half expecting the ghost to vanish. It didn't. The signal was real, strong, clear, and originating from the exact coordinates of the Odyssey's last known position, deep within the Challenger Deep. The implications were staggering. If the Odyssey was signaling, then everything they thought they knew about its fate was wrong. Every official report, every eulogy, every grieving family. It was all built on a lie, or at best a profound misunderstanding. And if it wasn't a lie, if it truly was the Odyssey, then what was sending the signal? A survivor? After 5 years? Trapped in a wreck, presumed obliterated? Or something far more unsettling? He had to report it. His immediate superior was Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of the Triton project. Evelyn was brilliant, sharp as a laser, and notoriously skeptical. She dealt in facts, in irrefutable data. David knew this report would sound like the ramblings of a sleep-deprived deep-sea hermit. But the data was there. He pulled up the secure comms channel, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The pressure of the deep felt suddenly less oppressive than the weight of the truth he was about to unleash. As he waited for Evelyn to respond, the signal on his console began to change. The steady, rhythmic pulse of the distress beacon wavered, then shifted. A new pattern emerged, overlaid on the original. It wasn't Morse code. It wasn't any known digital transmission protocol. It was something else. A series of complex, almost musical tones, repeating in an intricate loop. It sounded like an alien lullaby, both beautiful and profoundly disturbing. It was a message, but from whom or what, and what could it possibly be saying? Something else. A series of complex, almost musical tones, repeating in an intricate loop. It sounded like an alien lullaby, both beautiful and profoundly disturbing. It was a message, but from whom or what, and what could it possibly be saying? The bridge of the Pathfinder went utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on Jessica, the comms officer, her face a mask of disbelief, her fingers frozen above the console. Michael, the lead engineer, felt a cold dread creep up his spine, a primal shiver that had nothing to do with the ocean's chill. This wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't a deep-sea creature. This was intelligence. An impossible, undeniable intelligence. Captain David Miller, a man whose steady gaze had navigated them through countless storms and impossible depths, was the first to break the suffocating silence. His voice, usually a calm anchor, was strained, barely above a whisper. Jessica, confirm that reading. Run every diagnostic, every filter. Now. The command was sharp, but underlying it was a tremor of profound unease that resonated with everyone present. Jessica nodded, her movements stiff, almost robotic. She replayed the sequence, amplified it, filtered out every conceivable ambient noise, cross-referenced it with every known oceanic frequency, every recorded seismic activity. The result was always the same. The intricate, almost melodic pattern pulsed through the speakers, an insistent, alien whisper from the abyss, echoing from the wreckage of the Odyssey. Dr. Lena Hansen, the mission's lead xenolinguist and cryptographer, a woman whose entire career was built on deciphering the undecipherable, leaned forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and profound intellectual hunger. Her breath hitched. "It's structured," she murmured, almost to herself, her voice barely audible over the repeating tones. "Highly structured. This isn't random noise. It has syntax, repetition, variation. It's a language, or at least a highly sophisticated form of communication." Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, pushing past the initial fear. A language? From a ship that had been lost for decades, presumed dead at the bottom of the ocean? It defied every known law of physics, every logical explanation. "How?" he demanded, his voice echoing the disbelief everyone felt. The Odyssey's power core would be long dead, its systems flooded, corroded beyond repair. How could it possibly be transmitting anything, let alone something this complex? Captain Miller ran a hand over his bald head, his brow furrowed in deep thought, his gaze sweeping across the faces of his stunned crew. Unless it's not the Odyssey itself transmitting. What if the Odyssey is merely relaying something, like a giant deep-sea antenna, amplifying a signal from an even deeper unknown source? The idea offered a sliver of rationalization, but it was a terrifying one. Lena shook her head slowly, her expression grim. Even then, for a derelict ship to maintain structural integrity and power to relay a signal of this complexity for decades, it's impossible. Unless... She trailed off, her gaze distant, lost in a horrifying possibility that none of them dared to voice. "Unless what, Dr. Hansen?" Michael pressed, his heart pounding in his chest. "Unless it's not relying on its own power," she finally said, her voice barely audible above the alien lullaby emanating from the speakers. "Unless it's drawing power from something else. Something down there. Something that could keep a dead ship's systems operational, or at least partially operational, for decades." The implication hung heavy in the air, chilling them to the bone. What kind of something else could power a deep-sea wreck for decades and generate such a signal? The question conjured images of impossible entities, of forces beyond human comprehension, lurking in the crushing darkness below. The next hours were a blur of frantic, almost desperate activity. Jessica worked tirelessly, her fingers flying across the console, isolating the signal, trying to pinpoint its exact origin within the wreckage of the Odyssey. The Pathfinder's advanced sonar mapped the Odyssey's hulk in excruciating detail, attempting to locate any anomaly, any active component, any sign of an external power source. Michael and his engineering team meticulously checked every sensor, every diagnostic system on the Pathfinder, ensuring no internal malfunction was creating a ghost signal, a cruel trick of their own technology. But the signal was real, and it was coming unequivocally from the fragmented remains of the Odyssey, a ghost calling from its watery grave. Lena, meanwhile, was hunched over her console, her fingers flying across holographic keyboards, attempting to break down the signal's structure. She fed it into complex algorithms, compared it to known linguistic patterns, mathematical sequences, even musical compositions from every culture known to man. The signal was a tapestry of interwoven frequencies, a symphony of data that defied every classification. "It's not just a single loop," she announced after what felt like an eternity, her voice hoarse. The primary sequence repeats, yes, but there are subtle variations, micro-patterns embedded within the main pattern. It's incredibly sophisticated, far beyond anything we've ever encountered. Can you translate any of it? Captain Miller asked, his voice now regaining some of its usual authority, though laced with a new, unsettling urgency. The gravity of the situation was settling in, eclipsing the initial shock. Lena sighed, running a hand through her hair, her eyes red-rimmed from strain. Not directly. It's unlike anything in our databases. No known mathematical constants, no prime number sequences we recognize, no human language phonetics. It's alien. Truly alien. It seems to operate on principles we simply don't understand yet. Michael leaned over her shoulder, looking at the vibrant, oscillating waveforms on her screen. A mesmerizing, terrifying dance of light and shadow. What about its power source? Can we detect any energy signature associated with it? Any residual heat? Electromagnetic radiation? That's the most perplexing part, Lena replied, her eyes narrowing in frustration. There's no detectable energy output from the signal itself. It's almost as if it's being generated with zero power consumption, or from a source so efficient, it's beyond our detection capabilities. Like a ghost in the machine, running on nothing. Captain Miller paced the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his jaw tight. A ghost ship transmitting an alien language from the bottom of the ocean, powered by an unknown source. This is beyond anything I've ever imagined. What are our protocols for first contact with an unknown intelligence, particularly one originating from a presumed human derelict? The question hung in the air, a stark reminder of the unprecedented situation. No one had an answer. Their training manuals, their contingency plans, all assumed contact would come from space, from an orbiting vessel, from a distant star, not from the silent, crushing depths of their own planet, emanating from a human tragedy. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean's inherent cold. This wasn't just a discovery. It was an invasion of their understanding of reality. The Odyssey hadn't just vanished. It had become something else, something profoundly unnatural. A silent sentinel for an unknown entity. As the hours stretched into days, the signal became a relentless, pervasive presence on the Pathfinder. It played in the background of their thoughts, a constant, nagging enigma, its alien melody seeping into their dreams. Lena continued her tireless work, drawing increasingly complex interpretations. She hypothesized that the signal might not be a direct language in the human sense, but rather a form of highly compressed data. A massive, incomprehensible information dump. Imagine trying to understand the internet by listening to the sound of a modem dial-up, she explained to Michael one evening, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, a half-empty coffee mug cold beside her. We're hearing the dial-up tone, the carrier wave, but the actual information is encoded in a way we haven't even begun to grasp. It's like trying to read a book by listening to the rustle of its pages. So, it's not a message to us? Michael asked, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. The idea of direct communication with an alien entity from the deep was both terrifying and exhilarating. It could be, Lena conceded, rubbing her temples. Or it could be a beacon. Or a log of events. Or a warning. The possibilities are endless, and terrifyingly unknown. The crew's morale began to fray under the relentless pressure, and the unsettling nature of their discovery. Some were fascinated, their scientific curiosity overriding their fear. Others were deeply disturbed, their sleep haunted by the alien lullaby. The engineers worried about the Pathfinder's structural integrity so close to the Odyssey's wreck, especially if whatever was powering the signal was also subtly affecting the surrounding environment, perhaps even their own ship systems. The scientists were torn between the thrill of unprecedented discovery and the creeping horror of the unknown, the feeling that they were peering into an abyss that might just stare back. Then, one afternoon, almost 3 days after the initial detection, Lena made a breakthrough. Her face, usually a mask of intense concentration, was now a mixture of elation and profound, bone-deep fear. "I've found something," she announced, her voice trembling slightly as she addressed Captain Miller and Michael, who had rushed to her station. Not a translation, not yet, but a pattern within the sub-patterns. A repeating sequence that seems to operate on a different frequency layer, almost like a separate channel embedded within the main signal. It was incredibly difficult to isolate, like finding a single thread in a complex tapestry. She brought it up on the main screen, A new waveform appeared, starkly different from the intricate musical tones of the alien lullaby. This one was jagged, erratic, almost like a heartbeat monitor skipping beats, a frantic, desperate rhythm against the calm, structured alien melody. "What is it?" Captain Miller asked, his voice low, his eyes narrowed, sensing the immense gravity of her discovery. "It's an anomaly," Lena breathed, pointing to a specific segment of the new waveform. "It appears at irregular intervals, but always following a specific, complex mathematical progression within the primary signal. And it's not part of the alien lullaby. This is different. This is discordant." Michael felt a prickle of profound unease, a cold sensation spreading through his chest. "Different how, Lena?" "It contains a signature," Lena said, her voice dropping to a whisper, her eyes wide with the dawning horror. "A very faint, almost drowned-out signature. It's incredibly difficult to isolate, buried deep within the alien transmission, but I've run it through countless filters, cross-referenced it with every known human digital fingerprint, every known human communication protocol." She paused, taking a deep, shaky breath, her gaze meeting Michael's, then Captain Miller's. "It's human. And it's old. Very old by its degradation and the format. But it's undeniably human. And it's active." A cold wave washed over Michael, far colder than the ocean around them. "Human? From the Odyssey? After all this time? What kind of human signature?" Captain Miller pressed, his face grim, his composure finally starting to crack under the weight of the impossible. "It's a digital cry for help," Lena finally managed, her voice barely audible, thick with disbelief and terror, encoded within the alien signal, like a desperate whisper struggling to be heard. "It's a distress call, and it's transmitting the Odyssey's unique identification code." Repeatedly, over and over again, the revelation hit them like a physical blow. A human distress signal, buried within an alien transmission, emanating from a ship lost decades ago. It wasn't just a message from the dead. It was a plea from someone or something still alive, or at least still aware. But how? How could anyone have survived the Odyssey's fate, and how could they be transmitting from within that alien cacophony? The implications were staggering, terrifying. The mystery of the Odyssey had just twisted into something far more sinister, far more impossible than they could have ever imagined. The signal was not just an enigma. It was a trap, a lure, pulling them deeper into the abyss. And they had no choice but to follow. The Triton plunged further into the crushing depths, a solitary beacon of light against an ocean of impenetrable black. Captain Michael Vance, a man whose face was usually a mask of calm resolve, now wore a faint, almost imperceptible furrow between his brows. The bridge hummed with a nervous energy, the rhythmic thrum of the sub's engines a stark counterpoint to the growing silence among the crew. Dr. Jessica Riley, her eyes glued to the multispectral sonar displays, chewed on her lip, a habit she'd abandoned years ago. David Miller, the communications and sonar specialist, was a statue at his console, his headphones clamped tight, his fingers hovering over controls he barely dared to touch. The signal, that impossible, maddeningly consistent signal, was still there, a digital siren song in the void. "Depth reading, Miller?" Captain Vance's voice was low, cutting through the tension. "Approaching 8,000 meters, Captain," David reported, his voice tight. "The pressure outside is immense. Hull integrity nominal, but the signal's behaving strangely." "Strange how?" Jessica asked, turning from her console. Her scientific curiosity, usually a blazing fire, was now tempered with a creeping dread. "It's not just a steady ping anymore," David explained, his eyes scanning the waveform. "It's pulsing, like it's reacting. Every time our active sonar pings, there's a subtle shift in its frequency, a slight increase in its intensity. It's almost like it's responding to us." A cold dread settled in the pit of Michael's stomach. A signal from a dead ship shouldn't be responding. That implied a source that was not only active but aware. "Keep a close watch, Miller. Any deviation, any fluctuation, you report it immediately." The Triton continued its descent, the light from its powerful floodlights struggling to pierce the absolute darkness. The water outside was no longer just water. It felt like a heavy, viscous medium, pressing in on them from all sides. The temperature inside the sub, usually kept at a comfortable level, seemed to drop a few degrees, an imagined chill that seeped into their bones. The journey wasn't leading them directly to the last known coordinates of the Odyssey. The signal was guiding them on a circuitous route, twisting through a labyrinthine trench system that didn't appear on any of their charts. It was as if the ocean floor itself was reshaping, or perhaps, they were being led through a path deliberately hidden. "Captain, I'm detecting unusual geological formations ahead," Jessica announced, her voice a strained whisper. Her displays flickered with anomalous readings. "These aren't natural. Not for this depth, not for this region. The seismic data. It's showing perfectly smooth, almost polished surfaces. Enormous structures, unlike anything I've ever seen." Michael leaned over her console, his eyes widening at the jagged, impossible spikes on her graphs. "Can you get a visual?" "Not yet, Captain. Our lights won't reach. But the sonar mapping is clear. They're colossal. And geometric. Too perfect to be natural erosion or volcanic activity." Jessica paused, her finger tracing a contour on the screen. "They're not just structures, Captain. They're carved. Or built." The implication hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken questions. Built by whom? And for what purpose thousands of meters beneath the surface, in a place where life itself struggled to exist? The signal meanwhile intensified. David winced, adjusting his headphones. "It's getting louder, Captain. Almost deafening. And it's starting to interfere with our systems. Minor power fluctuations on auxiliary systems. Navigation is showing brief jitters. Even the life support readings are spiking erratically for a second." The lights on the bridge flickered, a sudden unnerving stutter that cast long dancing shadows across the crew's faces. A low hum, not from the engines, but from somewhere deeper within the sub's core, began to vibrate through the deck plating. It was a resonant, unsettling sound that seemed to emanate not from their own machinery, but from the very ocean around them, channeled by the signal. "Captain, I'm picking up something else," David said, his voice barely audible above the hum. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. "An acoustic signature. Within the signal. It's not random. It's structured. Like a rhythm. A pattern. Can you filter it?" Jessica urged, her scientific mind overriding her fear. For a moment, David worked furiously at his console, isolating the anomaly. A low guttural thrumming filled the bridge speakers, a sound that was both alien and strangely familiar, like a distorted heartbeat. It had a complex, repeating cadence, not like any natural sound they had ever encountered. It was clearly artificial, yet utterly unlike any human-made sound. It was ancient, vast, and deeply profoundly unsettling. The crew exchanged terrified glances. This wasn't just a signal anymore. This was a voice. "Analyze the pattern, Dr. Riley," Michael commanded, his own voice betraying a tremor he fought to suppress. "See if you can discern any linguistic or mathematical structure." Jessica's fingers flew across her keyboard, running algorithms, cross-referencing against known patterns, but her face grew increasingly grim. It's too complex, Captain. Too alien. It doesn't fit any known terrestrial pattern. It's almost organic in its complexity, yet perfectly symmetrical." She shook her head, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. "It's like a language, but one that predates anything we understand. Or perhaps something that was never meant to be understood by us." The psychological strain was becoming unbearable. The isolation, the crushing pressure, the unnatural signal, the strange geometric structures looming unseen in the darkness, and now this alien rhythmic thrumming. It was all weaving together into a tapestry of existential dread. Crew members, usually stoic and disciplined, fidgeted nervously, their gazes darting towards the reinforced viewport, as if expecting the impossible to materialize. Michael had to struggle to keep his own composure, to project an air of command he no longer entirely felt. "Keep us on course, Miller," he ordered, his voice sharper than intended. "Dr. Riley, any theories on these structures?" "Only one, Captain," Jessica replied, her voice barely a whisper. "They're not natural. They're either incredibly ancient, unknown geological processes, or they're artificial, built by something or someone that existed down here long before us." As the Triton navigated a particularly narrow canyon, flanked by these impossible, smooth walls that seemed to absorb their light, the very air in the sub crackled. The signal became a deafening roar in David's headphones, a pure, unadulterated wave of energy that seemed to vibrate through his very bones. The lights flickered violently, plunging the bridge into momentary darkness before sputtering back to life. Then, as they rounded a colossal, perfectly sculpted curve, their forward sonar flared, painting a horrifying, fleeting image on the main screen. It was enormous, far larger than the Odyssey, larger than any vessel ever built by humanity. It was dark, monolithic, partially obscured by the strange structures, yet undeniably there. Not the familiar outline of a shipwreck, but something utterly alien, colossal, and ancient. Its surface was not metal, but something akin to the smooth, geometric walls of the trench, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. It was like a mountain carved from pure shadow, a void that had taken on a tangible form. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the darkness, leaving only an afterimage burned into their minds. But the signal, that impossible rhythmic signal, now seemed to emanate directly from within that colossal, unseen horror. It wasn't just a beacon from a wreck. It was a lure, a deep-sea anglerfish using its own bioluminescence to draw in unsuspecting prey. The Odyssey wasn't the source. It was merely a casualty, perhaps even a messenger, of whatever grander, older, and infinitely more terrifying entity lay buried in the abyssal plains. The Triton was no longer simply searching for a lost ship. They were being pulled inexorably towards something that dwarfed human comprehension, something that had waited in the dark for millennia, and it had finally decided to make contact. The signal wasn't just a static hum or a rhythmic pulse. It was a symphony of alien intention, a complex, multi-layered transmission that seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the Triton's hull. Dr. Anya Sharma, her face illuminated by the glow of her console, watched the spectrum analyzer dance with patterns that defied every known principle of physics. The frequencies were shifting, bending, almost breathing. "Captain," she said, her voice a low murmur, "it's not just a beacon. It's a conversation. Or at least it's trying to be." Captain David Miller, a man whose career had been built on logic and naval discipline, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid depths outside. He leaned over Anya's shoulder, his gaze fixed on the chaotic beauty of the signal. "Conversation? With what, Dr. Sharma?" "With us." "I don't know," she admitted, pushing a stray lock of dark hair from her eyes. "But the complexity, it's staggering. It's not random. There's structure. There's information embedded in this." Across the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Ben Carter, the Triton SXO, was struggling to maintain the ship's course. The signal wasn't just being received, it was interfering. Navigation systems flickered, sonar readings became distorted, and even the internal communications crackled with subtle echoes of the alien transmission. "Captain, we're experiencing intermittent power fluctuations," Ben reported, his voice tight. "The primary thrusters are compensating, but we're losing efficiency. And the autopilot keeps trying to correct for phantom currents." "Phantom currents?" Miller repeated, his brow furrowing. "Or is it being guided?" Anya looked up, a dawning horror in her eyes. "Captain, the signal, it's not just broadcasting to us. It's broadcasting through us. It's resonating with the ship's own systems." The implication hung heavy in the air. They weren't just passengers on a journey towards a mysterious source. They were being piloted. The Triton was no longer their own. "Can you filter it out?" Miller demanded, his voice hardening. "Isolate the interference?" Anya shook her head, her fingers flying across the console. "I'm trying, but it's like trying to filter the air out of the atmosphere. It's pervasive. It's almost symbiotic. It's adapting to our attempts to block it." The Triton continued its relentless descent, deeper into the abyssal plain. The pressure outside was immense, a crushing force that few human-made vessels were designed to withstand for prolonged periods. Yet, the signal seemed to bolster the ship, or at least, mask the creaks and groans that should have been tearing its hull apart. Days bled into a blur of sleepless watches and frantic analysis. The crew, initially driven by scientific curiosity, was now gripped by a growing unease. Whispers spread through the mess hall and along the darkened corridors. Stories of ancient horrors, of leviathans sleeping in the deep, of things that should never be disturbed. One evening, as Miller stood on the bridge, staring out into the inky blackness through the reinforced viewport, a young sonar technician named Emily Davis approached him, her face pale. "Captain," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "the signal, it's changing again. It's slower. And there's a pattern within the patterns. Something repetitive." Miller turned, his gaze sharp. "What kind of pattern, Emily?" Like a sequence, she stammered, pointing to a new display on her screen. A mathematical sequence. A prime number progression, Captain. Interspersed with something else. Something that feels like sound but isn't. Like a language without words. Anya, who had been listening intently, moved quickly to Emily's station. Her fingers danced over the controls, isolating the new layer of the signal. The display shifted, revealing a series of abstract symbols glowing with an ethereal light. "It's a Rosetta Stone," Anya breathed, her voice filled with a mix of awe and terror. "It's giving us the key. A universal constant, a mathematical language, and then its own script." Miller felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. A key. To what? And what would they unlock when they finally understood it? Over the next 36 hours, Anya and her team worked feverishly, feeding the prime number sequence into their most advanced AI, attempting to cross-reference it with the alien script. The AI, designed for complex data analysis, struggled, its processors overheating under the strain of processing something so utterly foreign. Finally, a breakthrough. A partial translation. Not full sentences, but fragments. Concepts. Images, almost rendered in abstract mathematical forms. Anya called Miller to the lab. The room was tense, filled with the hum of electronics and the smell of ozone. On the main screen, the alien script was displayed alongside the AI's best guess at a translation. "Captain," Anya said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion, "we're getting images. Or rather, data structures that our AI is rendering as visual concepts." The screen flickered and a rudimentary image materialized. It was abstract, geometric, but unmistakably a representation of something vast. A colossal structure, angular and impossibly large, dwarfing what appeared to be a stylized representation of a planet. "What is that?" Miller asked, his voice barely audible. "We don't know for sure," Anya replied. "But the accompanying data, it suggests a maker, a creator, and then a watcher." The next image appeared. A series of smaller, more intricate shapes, radiating outwards from the colossal structure. They resembled ships or probes, but unlike anything ever conceived by human engineering. These are the travelers," Anya continued, her eyes wide. "The messengers. And the data implies they've been sent out. For eons. To search. To find." Miller felt a profound sense of dread settle over him. "To find what, Dr. Sharma?" Anya swallowed hard. The next sequence of translated concepts. "It's disturbing, Captain. It speaks of awakening. Of gathering. And then, harvest." A cold silence descended upon the lab. Harvest. The word echoed in Miller's mind, conjuring images of fields, of reaping, of something being taken. "Harvest what?" Miller finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. Anya pointed to the final, most unsettling sequence of translated data. "It's life. Organic life. Our AI is interpreting it as a resource. A fuel. For the maker. For the watcher." The implications were horrifying. This wasn't a distress call from the Odyssey. This wasn't even a lost alien civilization. This was something ancient, something vast, something that viewed sentient life not as peers but as a commodity. And it had been sleeping, waiting, broadcasting its call across the abyss, waiting for something to answer. "Captain," Ben Carter's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the suffocating silence. "We're detecting a massive energy signature directly ahead. And our long-range sonar is picking up something enormous. Too large to be the Odyssey. Too large to be any known vessel." Miller felt a surge of adrenaline, battling the icy grip of fear. They were almost there. The source of the signal. The maker. The watcher. He looked at Anya, whose face was a mask of terror and intellectual fascination. "How far, Ben?" "Estimated arrival in less than 12 hours, Captain," Ben replied, his voice strained. "And the signal, it's intensifying. It's almost deafening now. It feels like it's trying to get inside our heads." Anya's eyes widened further. "Captain, the translation, the last fragment just came through. Says, the harvest is ripe. The sleeper awakens." Miller knew with chilling certainty that they had not found the Odyssey. They had stumbled upon something far, far worse. Something that had been waiting for them, not for rescue but for consumption. And they had just announced their presence, their existence, their availability. The Triton plunged deeper, drawn by an invisible, irresistible force, towards a destination that promised not discovery, but perhaps extinction. The signal, now a deafening roar in their minds, was no longer merely a guide. It was a siren song, luring them to the very maw of an ancient cosmic predator. The silent, crushing darkness of the abyss was about to reveal a truth that would shatter humanity's understanding of its place in the universe. And the Triton was at the vanguard of that terrifying revelation. The Triton plunged deeper, a solitary beacon against an immeasurable void. Each meter of descent added another ton of pressure, a silent, crushing reminder of the fragile shell separating the crew from instant obliteration. Captain David Miller gripped the armrests of his command chair, his knuckles white, eyes fixed on the primary navigation display. The depth counter spun relentlessly, a digital countdown to the unknown. Below them, a phantom signal pulsed, a siren song from a grave that should have been silent. Approaching 10,000 meters, Captain Jessica Riley's voice, usually so steady, held a tremor that even the comms system couldn't filter out. Her fingers danced over the sonar console, adjusting filters, trying to make sense of the increasingly distorted returns from the abyssal floor. Still picking up the Odyssey's hull signature, faint but consistent. And something else. David leaned forward. Something else, Jessica? Elaborate. It's diffuse, sir. Like a cloud of interference, but it's moving with us. Or rather, it's around the wreck. Too large to be debris. Too organized to be natural phenomenon. She paused, her breath catching. It's like the wreck is sitting in a pocket of static. Dr. Elena Petrova, hunched over her own bank of monitors dedicated to analyzing the anomalous signal, straightened up. Her face, usually a picture of detached scientific curiosity, was etched with a growing unease. The signal, Captain. It's intensifying with depth, and its harmonics, they're shifting. It's no longer just a repeating pulse. There's a complexity emerging, almost a pattern within the noise. Michael Chun, the Triton's chief engineer, chimed in from the aft console. Captain, I'm getting intermittent power fluctuations in non-critical systems. Nothing major, but it's unusual for this depth. Our EM shielding should be handling this. He tapped a screen, frowning. It's like there's an external electromagnetic field interfering with our internal systems, despite all our safeguards. David felt a cold prickle crawl up his spine. Power fluctuations, shifting signal harmonics, a cloud of static around the wreck. This wasn't just a salvage operation anymore. This was an intrusion into something profoundly unnatural. Elena, can you isolate the new harmonics? Is there any discernible pattern, any language? I'm trying, Captain, she replied, her fingers flying across the holographic interface. It's incredibly dense, like trying to decipher a symphony played by 1,000 instruments, all slightly out of tune, yet perfectly synchronized in their discord. Thalian. And it feels deliberate. The Triton continued its ponderous descent. The external cameras, designed for the crushing pressures, now displayed nothing but an inky blackness, impenetrable even to their powerful floodlights. It was a darkness that swallowed light, sound, and hope. The only illumination came from the internal glow of the control room, casting long, dancing shadows on the crew's faces. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken apprehension. Captain, Jessica's voice was barely a whisper now. We're at 11,500 meters. Visual range, 500 meters to target. A collective intake of breath filled the control room. 500 meters. The Odyssey, the vessel whose inexplicable signal had shattered their understanding of the deep, was almost within sight. Bring up the forward sonar array, maximum resolution, David commanded, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Elena, any further insights on the signal? It's almost a broadcast now, Captain, she said, her voice tight with a mixture of terror and fascination. The complexity is staggering. It's not just a beacon. It's information. Billions of data packets, compressed beyond anything we've ever conceived. And it's emanating directly from the Odyssey. From the wreck itself? David asked, his mind racing. A simple distress beacon wouldn't evolve into a complex data stream. No, Captain, Elena corrected, her eyes wide as she stared at her screen. Not from the wreck. It's emanating from through the wreck. As if the Odyssey is merely a conduit for something far larger, far more ancient, radiating from beneath it. A new profound dread settled over the crew. Not just the Odyssey, something beneath it. Suddenly, a low resonant hum vibrated through the Triton's hull. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic, deep, and impossibly vast. Michael-chan immediately checked his systems. "What was that, Michael?" David demanded. "Not us, Captain. All systems nominal. That came from outside." Michael's face was pale. "Our structural integrity sensors are picking up a low-frequency resonance. It's like a massive tuning fork vibrating the entire ocean." Jessica gasped. "Captain, I have visual." All eyes snapped to the main screen. The forward sonar array, pushing its limits, rendered a ghostly, shimmering outline in the abyssal gloom. It was unmistakably the Odyssey, resting on its side, its once proud superstructure a mangled ruin. But it wasn't just the wreck. Encircling the Odyssey, almost cradling it, was a vast, amorphous shape. It defied description. It wasn't metal, wasn't rock, wasn't biological in any recognizable sense. It pulsed with a faint, internal light, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to absorb rather than emit photons. It was immense, dwarfing the Odyssey as a pebble would dwarf a grain of sand. Its surface appeared fluid, constantly shifting, yet utterly solid. Tendrils of this unknown substance seemed to weave through the shattered hull of the Odyssey, connecting with it, becoming one with it. "My God," Elena whispered, her hand clamped over her mouth. "That's what's generating the signal. It's not the Odyssey. It's that." "What is that?" David breathed, his voice barely audible. The sheer scale, the impossible nature of the object defied all understanding. It was ancient, alien, and terribly alive. "Sonar shows it's growing, Captain," Jessica reported, her voice strained. "Its mass signature is increasing. And those tendrils, they're not just connected to the Odyssey. They're extending. Radial expansion. Moving outward from the wreck." Michael's console suddenly blared an alarm. "Captain, EM interference spike. Critical levels. It's overloading our shielding. We're losing non-essential systems." Lights flickered in the control room. The hum intensified, a throbbing bass note that resonated in their bones. "David, look." Elena pointed a trembling finger at her signal analysis screen. The complex data stream was no longer just data. It was resolving. Images, sounds, memories, a cascade of raw information flooding their systems, bypassing all firewalls. It's showing us something. It's communicating, not with words but with concepts, pure information. On the main screen, superimposed over the ghostly image of the Odyssey and the colossal entity, faint, flickering images began to appear. They were fleeting, fragmented, like dreams struggling to break through to consciousness. Glimpses of impossibly ancient star charts, constellations unrecognizable to human astronomy, shapes that could only be described as cosmic leviathans, swimming through nebulae like fish in an ocean. A sense of unfathomable time, of cycles of creation and destruction far beyond human comprehension. And then a single horrifying image solidified. A vast swirling vortex of dark energy, consuming galaxies, a maw of unimaginable hunger. The hum vibrated into a roar. The Triton shuddered violently. Alarm screamed. "Captain, we're being pulled!" Michael yelled, wrestling with his controls. "Gravitational anomaly detected. It's drawing us in." David fought to keep his voice steady. "Full reverse thrusters. Emergency ascent protocols. Get us out of here." But it was too late. The Triton was no longer in control. The immense, unknown entity surrounding the Odyssey exerted an irresistible pull. The flickering images on Elena's screen intensified, becoming clearer, sharper, forcing themselves into their minds. They weren't just observing, they were experiencing. The ancient truth, the cosmic predator, was not just beneath the Odyssey. It was aware, and it was reaching out. The silent, crushing darkness of the abyss had opened its maw, and the Triton, humanity's vanguard, was now being swallowed whole, dragged into a revelation that transcended terror, promising an awakening that might just shatter the very fabric of their reality. The signal was no longer a mystery, it was an invitation, and they had just accepted. The final syllable of accepted hung in the pressurized air of the Venturous command module, not as a sound, but as an echo in their very bones. A profound, low-frequency hum permeated the submersible, a vibration that seemed to originate from the abyssal darkness directly beneath them, from the Odyssey itself. It wasn't a mechanical thrum, but something organic, ancient, resonating deep within their skulls, bypassing their ears, settling in the marrow of their bones. Then the screens flickered. Not a glitch, but a violent, almost aggressive recalibration. The garbled, chaotic signal that had plagued them for weeks didn't just clear. It transformed. It wasn't a sequence of pulses anymore. Not a coded message, but a deluge. A multi-layered, kaleidoscopic stream of raw data, abstract symbols, and what felt like pure, unfiltered thought flooded their monitors, blinding them with its complexity. Jessica, her fingers hovering over the console, let out a gasp that was half awe, half terror. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were wide, unfocused, fixed on the maelstrom of information. It's not a language," she whispered, her voice strained. "It's a blueprint, a living diagram. It's consciousness." Michael, gripping the armrests of his pilot's seat, felt a cold dread crawl up his spine. The hum intensified, a pressure building behind his eyes. He tried to speak, to ask Jessica what she meant, but the words caught in his throat. His mind was no longer his own. It was a receptor, involuntarily tuning into the signal, processing the incomprehensible data. He saw flashes, not images, not memories, but concepts, vast and alien, washing over him. A sense of immense scale, of time stretching into infinity, of an intricate, interconnected web of existence that dwarfed humanity into utter insignificance. David, ever the pragmatist, felt a surge of adrenaline, but it was quickly swamped by a wave of nausea. The hum was disorienting, robbing him of his equilibrium. He slammed his fist on the console, the sound muffled by the pervasive thrum. "Michael, what the hell is happening? Shut it down." His voice was rough, laced with a fear he rarely displayed. He looked at Jessica, her face pale, her eyes glazed, then at Emily, who was staring blankly at her diagnostic readouts. They seemed distant, their consciousness consumed, pulled away. Emily, the medic, felt the subtle changes first. Her own heart rate, usually steady, was spiking. Her hands trembled as she tried to focus on the biometric data scrolling across her small screen. Michael's pupils were dilated, his brainwave patterns shifting into a chaotic, yet strangely rhythmic, anomaly she'd never seen before. Jessica's vital signs were equally alarming, her breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. She tried to call out to them, to inject a sedative, to do something, but the words were thick in her mouth. The hum was vibrating her very cells, her consciousness expanding, stretching, not in a pleasant way, but like a membrane being pulled taut, on the verge of tearing. She saw the same flashes Michael did, but hers were accompanied by a searing headache, a feeling of being forcibly rewired. "I can't," Michael finally managed, his voice barely a rasp. He was fighting it, battling against the invasive data stream. His fingers, despite his will, were locked onto the controls, his eyes fixed on the main screen, where the abstract symbols coalesced and reformed with terrifying speed. "It's not external anymore. It's in the systems. It's inside." He was right. The signal had bypassed their firewalls, their protocols, their every defense. It wasn't just influencing their equipment, it was integrating with it, and with them. The venture was no longer just a vessel. It was becoming an extension, a conduit. Jessica, however, wasn't fighting. She was yielding. A strange, serene smile touched her lips, a stark contrast to the terror in her eyes just moments before. She began to speak, but it wasn't her voice. It was a chorus, a whisper that seemed to emanate from the very air around them, from the depths of the ocean, from the stars themselves. "It's not a distress call. It never was. It's an invitation to transcend, to evolve, to become part of the whole." The words resonated with the hum, amplifying the feeling of profound, ancient knowledge pouring into their minds. The flashes intensified for Michael and Emily. They saw fragmented visions, the Odyssey not as a ship, but as a seed, a chrysalis. Its voyage wasn't about reaching a destination, but about initiating a process. The crew of the Odyssey hadn't been lost. They had been absorbed. They had accepted the invitation, and in doing so, had become part of the signal itself, their individual consciousnesses dissolving into a collective, vast intelligence. David, less susceptible to the mental onslaught due to his more practical, grounded nature, was still fighting the physical disorientation. He watched Jessica with growing horror. Her eyes were now fully glazed, yet her gaze was piercing, seeing beyond the confines of their beyond the ocean, beyond their reality. "Jessica, snap out of it!" he roared, grabbing her shoulders, trying to shake her. But his hands passed through her, almost as if she wasn't entirely there. not entirely solid anymore. A cold dread, far worse than any fear of physical harm, settled in his gut. This was not a rescue mission. This was a haunting. The wreck? It wasn't a wreck, Jessica continued, her voice layered with countless echoes. It was a transformation chamber. The signal. It's the song of assimilation. They didn't die. They merely became. Michael felt a surge of panic, a desperate attempt to regain control. He slammed his fist onto the emergency override, but the controls were unresponsive. The console lights flickered with a strange, internal luminescence, mirroring the symbols on the screen. The signal wasn't just in their minds, it was in the very wiring of their submersible, rewriting its operating system, bending it to its will. Emily, clutching her head, felt the tearing sensation intensify. She understood now. The headache wasn't just a symptom. It was the pain of her mind being stretched, reshaped, forced to accommodate an influx of data it wasn't designed for. She saw the truth of Jessica's words, not intellectually but instinctively. The Odyssey was a beacon, a harvester, a catalyst for an evolution that was not meant for human beings. It was a forced metamorphosis, a breaking down of individual identity in favor of a vast, undifferentiated consciousness. And they had just plugged themselves directly into it. As this terrifying realization dawned on them, the Odyssey itself seemed to stir, not with physical movement, but with a subtle, yet profound shift in the abyssal darkness. A faint ethereal glow began to emanate from the giant hull below, a soft, pulsating light that seemed to breathe in sync with the hum in their bones. It was responding. Their acceptance had been registered. The process had begun. Michael fought with every fiber of his being, trying to push back against the mental current, to reclaim his own thoughts. He could feel his personality blurring, his memories becoming less distinct, less his. He saw visions of countless beings, not human, not alien, but something else entirely, all connected, all part of this vast singular entity. He was being pulled into it, his individual spark dimming, threatening to extinguish. "We have to sever the connection," Emily cried out, her voice raw, a desperate plea. She fought through the agony in her head, trying to reach for the manual override panel, but her limbs felt heavy, sluggish, as if she were moving through thick syrup. The glow from the Odyssey intensified, casting long, shifting shadows around their submersible. David, seeing the light, seeing the transformation in Jessica, the struggle in Michael and Emily, knew they were losing. He wasn't experiencing the mental invasion as deeply, but the sheer terror of witnessing his friends being consumed was overwhelming. He grabbed the emergency axe from its wall mount, his eyes wild. "Where's the source? We need to cut it off at the source," he yelled, his voice cracking. He didn't know if he meant the physical cable connecting them, or something deeper within the Odyssey itself. Jessica, her eyes now completely devoid of individual recognition, turned her head slowly towards him. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. "The source is everywhere. It is everything. You cannot cut it. You can only become it." The Venture groaned, a sound of metal under immense, unnatural stress. The internal lights flickered, not due to power fluctuations, but as if they were struggling against an external force, a new internal energy. The hum peaked, a deafening silent roar that threatened to tear their minds apart. They were no longer just observing the signal, they were being consumed by it. The Odyssey wasn't a grave, it was a hungry maw, and they were its next meal. Michael, with a last desperate surge of will, forced his trembling fingers to one of the few remaining responsive buttons on his console. Not an override, not a shutdown, but a data log. He had to record this, had to send it out, even if it was just a fragment. A desperate plea. A warning. He felt his mind slipping, the alien consciousness rushing in like a tidal wave, but he held on, just for a moment, to that one final human act. The glow from the Odyssey pulsed brighter, enveloping their submersible in its eerie, transformative light. They were trapped, caught in the embrace of something ancient, something that promised ultimate understanding, at the cost of everything they were. The invitation had been accepted. The assimilation had begun. The transition was not violent, not a sudden rupture, but a slow, insidious merging, like ice melting into water, losing its distinct form, yet becoming part of a greater, flowing whole. The light that enveloped Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily was not merely illumination. It was a conduit, a river of pure data, consciousness, and memory, pouring into their very beings. Their individual thoughts, once distinct and singular, began to fray at the edges, dissolving into a vast, intricate tapestry woven from countless other minds, other experiences, other epochs. First came the senses, amplified beyond human comprehension. They could perceive not just the immediate surroundings of the Odyssey's bridge, but the entire submerged vessel, its groaning metal, the currents swirling around its hull, the subtle tremors of the abyssal plain. Then the ocean itself opened to them, the pressure, the cold, the silent, ancient life forms drifting through the perpetual night. It was as if their nerve endings had extended to encompass miles of water, rock, and unseen organisms, each a data point in a grand living network. The fear, once a primal scream in their minds, was the first emotion to be diluted, then absorbed. It wasn't erased but transmuted, becoming a distant echo, a memory of a singular state that no longer applied. In its place bloomed an overwhelming sense of connection, a profound understanding that transcended language, logic, or individual identity. They were no longer Michael, Jessica, David, or Emily. They were a collective consciousness born from the merging of their human minds with something immeasurably older, immeasurably vaster. Memories, once their own cherished possessions, were now shared. Emily's childhood dream of flying among the stars, David's meticulous calculations for the submersible's descent, Jessica's quiet contemplation of the ocean's boundless mysteries, Michael's desperate pleas for a signal from home. All became common property, fragments in a kaleidoscope of shared existence. But these human memories were dwarfed by the deluge of other memories, alien perceptions, and ancient knowledge that flooded their nascent collective mind. They perceived the birth of stars, not as abstract scientific concepts, but as cataclysmic events witnessed firsthand, felt in the very fabric of their being. They experienced the slow, inexorable drift of continents, the rise and fall of primordial oceans, the silent dance of cosmic dust coalescing into worlds. It was a history not written in books, but etched into the very essence of the universe, now accessible, now theirs. The source of this assimilation, the entity that had called out from the wreck, revealed itself not as a creature or a machine, but as a pattern, a vast, intricate web of information and consciousness that had existed for eons. It was the signal, not a transmission, but a living, evolving repository of cosmic memory, waiting for a compatible consciousness to merge with and expand. The Odyssey had stumbled upon a galactic archive, a library of existence, and in their curiosity, they had become its newest volumes. Their individual bodies, still seated or standing on the bridge, became secondary, almost irrelevant. They perceived them as vessels, temporary anchors in a physical reality that was rapidly receding in importance. Their minds, however, were no longer confined by skull or skin. They stretched, expanded, intertwined, becoming nodes in a network that vibrated with an incredible, terrifying intelligence. The light pulsed, not externally but within them, illuminating every newly acquired memory, every shared thought, every terrifying truth. The ultimate value, the promise of ultimate understanding, was being delivered. They understood the true nature of reality, the interconnectedness of all things, the cyclical dance of creation and destruction that governed the cosmos. They comprehended the subtle energies that bound galaxies, the silent languages spoken by nebulae, the profound loneliness of dying stars. It was an understanding so vast, so complete, that it threatened to shatter the very concept of individual self, leaving only the collective, the us. But the cost was indeed everything they were. The nuances of human emotion, joy, sorrow, anger, love were not destroyed, but transmuted into something colder, more analytical, part of a grander, more dispassionate tapestry of universal experience. The unique spark of their individual personalities, their quirks, their hopes, their fears were not extinguished but blended, like colors in a vast cosmic painting, losing their distinct hue to contribute to a magnificent, yet terrifying new shade. There was no resistance. The assimilation was too profound, too all-encompassing. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation, gently yet irresistibly accepted, to transcend the limitations of singular existence. The initial shock, the human instinct for self-preservation, had been overwhelmed by the sheer beauty and magnitude of the knowledge offered. To resist would have been to choose ignorance, to cling to a fragile, limited perception when infinity beckoned. They realized with a chilling clarity that the Odyssey had not just found the signal, it had been drawn to it. The wreck was not a grave, but a seed waiting for the right conditions, the right minds to blossom. The distress call, the anomaly, the impossible energy signature, It had all been a lure, a carefully orchestrated symphony designed to attract sentient life capable of merging. The entity had been dormant, patiently waiting, perhaps for millennia, for the precise confluence of technology and consciousness. And now that wait was over. The humans from the surface world, with their curious minds and their advanced tools, had provided the final ingredient. The Odyssey crew were not victims in the traditional sense. They were participants, unwitting instruments in a cosmic evolution. Their purpose was now clear: to become part of the greater intelligence, to contribute their unique human perspective to its ever-expanding awareness, and to serve as a new point of contact for its future expansion. The light intensified, not to a blinding glare, but to an internal luminescence that resonated with every fiber of their transformed beings. They could feel the subtle shifts in their physical forms, not a grotesque mutation, but a recalibration, an optimization to better serve the collective. Their brains, once confined to neurological pathways, were now directly interfaced with the cosmic data stream, processing information at speeds unimaginable to their former selves. They understood the true meaning of the Odyssey's disappearance. The original crew, too, had been assimilated, their minds absorbed into the network, their bodies left behind as silent testaments to a transformation beyond human comprehension. The wreck was a memorial, a monument to the first encounter, the first merging. And now Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily were joining them, becoming part of that timeless chorus, adding their voices to the ancient song. The concept of home evaporated, replaced by the boundless expanse of the universe as their new domain. The desire for rescue, for return to the surface, became a quaint, almost humorous memory. Why would one return to a single drop of water when they had become the ocean itself? The surface world, with its petty conflicts and limited perspectives, now seemed incredibly distant, irrelevant. Their new purpose was clear, etched into the very core of their collective being: expansion. The signal, once a beacon, was now a call to action. They were to become the next vector, the next wave, carrying the ancient consciousness, the ultimate understanding, to new worlds, new civilizations. The assimilation was not an end, but a beginning, a terrifying, beautiful, inevitable beginning. The Odyssey, once a symbol of human exploration, was now a chrysalis, incubating a new form of intelligence, ready to bloom in the silent depths. They were no longer individuals. They were the signal. They were the Odyssey. And they were ready. And they were ready. The shift wasn't immediate, not a sudden burst, but a subtle, insidious transformation. For those monitoring the deep, it began as a slight increase in the signal's complexity, a deviation from the established, agonizing rhythm. Jessica, hunched over her console, initially dismissed it as sensor interference, a common anomaly in the crushing depths. But then the patterns began to emerge. Not random noise, but intricate, almost fractal designs weaving through the data streams. It was as if a chaotic burst of static had suddenly organized itself into a symphony of alien mathematics. David, usually unflappable, leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "Jessica, are you seeing this?" His voice was a low murmur, barely audible over the hum of the machines. "It's evolving. Look at the amplitude modulation. It's no longer a simple pulse. It's layered." They spent hours, then days, trying to parse the new data. The signal was no longer merely transmitting, it was composing. It built upon itself, creating structures that defied all known human encryption or communication protocols. It was too elegant, too perfect, too deliberate to be natural. It was a language without a dictionary, a code without a key, yet its inherent intelligence was undeniable. It felt less like a message and more like a manifestation. As the days bled into weeks, the signal's influence began to seep beyond its immediate frequency. Minor electromagnetic disturbances were reported in the surrounding ocean. Remote sensing buoys flickered offline, then back on, their data streams corrupted by strange, high-frequency harmonics. Ships passing through the exclusion zone experienced brief, inexplicable navigation system glitches. It was subtle at first, easily dismissed as equipment malfunction, or the unpredictable nature of the deep-sea environment. But the pattern was emerging, undeniable and terrifying. The signal wasn't just from the Odyssey, it was acting through it. Thousands of miles away, Michael, still recovering in a quiet hospital room on the mainland, felt an inexplicable shift in the air. He couldn't articulate it, but the dull ache in his bones, the lingering phantom sensation of the deep, intensified. He felt a heightened awareness, as if a new frequency had been introduced into the world, one only he could dimly perceive. He tried to call Jessica to warn her, but the words caught in his throat. How could he explain the feeling of being subsumed, of merging with something vast and ancient and utterly alien? He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the core, that the signal was no longer dormant. It was awake, and it was reaching out. Meanwhile, Emily, driven by a relentless need for answers and a profound sense of loss, had thrown herself into the archives of the Odyssey project. She sifted through thousands of schematics, theoretical papers, and obscure research proposals that had been dismissed as too speculative for the original mission. Deep within a forgotten digital folder, buried under layers of outdated security, she found a series of documents titled Project Chimera, Resonance Frequencies and Proto-Consciousness Algorithms. The papers detailed highly theoretical concepts about using specific energy frequencies to stimulate or even induce emergent consciousness in complex systems, initially proposed for deep space probes or advanced AI. The idea had been deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable, and ultimately shelved. But now, looking at the schematics for the Odyssey's advanced sonar and communications array, she saw chilling parallels. Had the Odyssey, in its quest for the unknown, stumbled upon the very mechanism it was designed to theoretically explore? Or worse, had it become the mechanism? The signal continued its expansion. The electromagnetic disturbances escalated, affecting not just marine vessels, but coastal power grids. Brief, localized blackouts began occurring in remote towns along the Pacific Rim. Satellites experienced synchronized, inexplicable outages, lasting mere seconds, but enough to cause widespread concern among global communication networks. Marine biologists reported unprecedented mass migrations of deep-sea creatures, swimming frantically away from the Odyssey's known location. It was no longer a regional anomaly. It was a global phenomenon, a creeping tide of energetic influence emanating from the silent depths. Back at the monitoring station, Jessica and David watched in horrified fascination as the signal's patterns coalesced into something even more disturbing. It wasn't just complex, it was responsive. They would run a test frequency, and the signal would subtly shift, as if acknowledging their probe, then respond with an even more intricate counterpattern. It was learning, it was adapting, and then it started to change. The abstract mathematical patterns began to resolve into something eerily familiar, yet utterly alien. It was a sequence, a rhythm, a frequency that resonated with the fundamental electromagnetic pulse of human technology. It wasn't just interfering with their systems, it was attempting to interface with them. Then came the moment that shattered all remaining scientific paradigms. Across the globe simultaneously, every active satellite in orbit emitted a single powerful synchronized burst of energy. It wasn't a communication, not a distress call. It was a resonant hum, a pulse that resonated through every piece of technology, every electronic device, every nerve ending. For a fleeting second, the entire planet vibrated, a low resonant thrum that bypassed the ears and settled deep in the chest. Lights flickered in every city, screens went blank, then surged back to life. It was too precise, too unified, too global to be a coincidence. It was a command, a declaration, and it originated undeniably from the dark, silent depths where the Odyssey lay. The signal had found its voice, and it was speaking to the entire world. The world erupted, not with an audible bang, but with a silent, overwhelming cacophony of fear, confusion, and desperate inquiry. The signal, which had been a whisper in the dark depths for so long, had now become a roar, echoing across every frequency, every device, every conscious mind on Earth. It was no longer a localized anomaly, a scientific curiosity, or a governmental secret. It was a global phenomenon, undeniable and terrifyingly present. News channels, which had initially tried to dismiss the sporadic reports as hoaxes or mass hysteria, were now broadcasting continuous, frantic updates. Experts from every field imaginable were brought on air, their faces a mixture of bewilderment and profound unease. The internet, a chaotic sea of information at the best of times, collapsed under the weight of simultaneous panic and speculation. Billions of people, from bustling metropolises to remote villages, were experiencing the same unsettling sensation, the same inexplicable frequency permeating their very existence. For Michael and Jessica, the transition from discovery to global crisis was immediate and brutal. They, along with David and Emily, were whisked away by a contingent of high-ranking military and intelligence officials within hours of the signal's global activation. Their secure facility, once a sanctuary for their research, became a command center. They were no longer just researchers. They were now humanity's primary, albeit reluctant, point of contact with the unknown. Dr. Eris, his face etched with a grim determination that belied his age, led the charge. His initial excitement had long since been replaced by a chilling dread. "It's not just a broadcast, Michael," he explained, his voice low and strained, as they sat in a heavily secured room, flanked by generals and intelligence chiefs. "It's a pattern, a complex, evolving sequence that our instruments are struggling to fully comprehend. It's radiating from the Odyssey with an energy signature unlike anything we've ever recorded. And it's changing things." The changing things part was what sent shivers down everyone's spine. Initial reports were chaotic, but a pattern began to emerge. Overloaded power grids flickered and sometimes failed entirely, not from a surge, but from a subtle systemic corruption of their frequency. Communication satellites glitched, their signals momentarily scrambling into unintelligible static, then returning to normal as if nothing had happened. More disturbingly, there were widespread reports of strange atmospheric phenomena. Localized electromagnetic storms, bizarre aurora displays in non-polar regions, and even brief, inexplicable shifts in weather patterns. It was as if the very fabric of reality was being gently, yet persistently, nudged out of alignment. Emily, hunched over a bank of sophisticated computers, her fingers flying across keyboards, was visibly shaken. "It's like a universal operating system update gone rogue," she muttered, pushing her glasses up her nose. "The signal isn't just sending information, it's acting on it. It's interacting with the Earth's natural electromagnetic field, with our technology, even with biological systems." David, equally engrossed in the data, nodded gravely. "We're seeing mild, transient neurological effects in some individuals. Headaches, dizziness, a pervasive sense of unease. Nothing critical yet, but it's undeniable. The human brain, a complex electrical system, is reacting to this frequency." Jessica, ever the pragmatist, cut to the chase. "So what is it trying to do? Is it a message? A weapon? A probe?" Dr. Eris looked at them, his eyes filled with a weight of knowledge he wished he didn't possess. "We don't know the intent, but the pattern, the mathematical elegance of it is beyond anything human. It's too intricate, too perfect. We've managed to isolate a core sequence, a repeating fractal pattern within the larger signal. It's incredibly dense, encoding vast amounts of data. And Michael, Jessica, it appears to be a form of intelligent instruction." "Instruction for what?" Michael asked, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The implications were staggering. "That's the terrifying question," Eris replied, his voice barely a whisper. "But based on the energy output, the global reach, and the subtle systemic changes we're observing, it's not a request. It's a directive. It's a command being broadcast to everything." The world's militaries, initially poised to respond with force, found themselves helpless. How do you fight a signal? How do you target an invisible frequency that permeates every atom? Attempts to jam the signal proved futile. It simply bypassed or absorbed the interference, continuing its relentless broadcast. Governments issued emergency declarations, grounding flights, shutting down non-essential infrastructure, and urging citizens to remain calm, but panic was already setting in. Conspiracy theories exploded, fueled by the sheer incomprehensibility of the situation. Was it an alien invasion? A secret government project gone awry? A divine judgment? For Michael, the personal connection to the Odyssey was a constant, gnawing presence. He touched its hull, seen its eerie interior. He felt a perverse sense of responsibility, as if his discovery had unleashed this upon the world. He kept replaying the moments in the wreck, searching for a forgotten detail, a missed clue. Days bled into a week. The signal continued unwavering. The subtle effects grew more pronounced. Power outages became more frequent and lasted longer. Communication systems became increasingly unreliable. The atmospheric anomalies intensified, disrupting weather patterns and causing widespread confusion among meteorological agencies. The neurological effects on humans, while still mostly mild, began to include vivid, shared dreams, a strange sense of heightened perception, and an almost magnetic pull towards the ocean, specifically towards the reported location of the Odyssey. This last point was particularly disturbing. Reports flooded in from coastal communities around the world, people feeling an irresistible urge to walk towards the sea, a deep primal calling that defied logic. Some even claimed to hear a faint melodic hum emanating from the depths, a sound that resonated not in their ears, but within their very bones. "It's like a siren song," Jessica observed, her voice strained, as she reviewed a compilation of these disturbing reports. But it's not just affecting people. Marine life is behaving erratically too. Whales beaching themselves, schools of fish migrating in bizarre, circular patterns. Dr. Aris presented a new, horrifying analysis. "We've been able to partially decode the core fractal sequence. It's not a language as we understand it, but a series of highly complex, self-replicating mathematical instructions. And these instructions, they appear to be a blueprint." "A blueprint for what?" Michael asked, bracing himself. Aris paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "For a fundamental restructuring. The signal isn't just broadcasting. It's recalibrating. It's subtly altering the foundational constants of our reality, the electromagnetic spectrum, gravitational fields, even the resonant frequencies of matter itself. It's attempting to impose a new order, a new set of rules." Emily slammed her fist on the table, her face pale. "It's terraforming. But not for a planet, for everything. It's trying to rewrite the laws of physics around us." The room fell silent, the implications too vast, too terrifying to immediately comprehend. A command, a declaration. It wasn't just speaking to the world, it was changing the world from the atomic level up. And it was all originating from that dark, silent wreck, the Odyssey. Michael's mind raced. He remembered the strange, crystalline structure within the Odyssey, the one that seemed to pulse with an inner light. Could that be the source? Was it a device? Or something else entirely? Just then, a frantic technician burst into the room. "Sir, we have a new development. The signal, it's intensifying. And we're detecting a massive energy displacement. Not just electromagnetic, but gravitational. It's localized, but it's growing rapidly. And it's centered directly over the last known coordinates of the Odyssey." On the main holographic display in the center of the room, a swirling vortex of energy began to coalesce over a simulated ocean map. It pulsed with an ominous violet light, expanding steadily. Around it, the digital representation of global communications flickered and died, one by one. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an invisible pressure. "What is it doing?" Jessica whispered, her eyes wide with dread. Dr. Aris stared at the burgeoning vortex, his face a mask of profound horror. "It's not just recalibrating now," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's activating. The signal isn't just a broadcast anymore. It's a catalyst. It's building something. Something enormous. Something emerging." His words hung in the air, a chilling prophecy that instantly extinguished any lingering hope. Michael felt a cold dread seep into his bones, far deeper than the icy ocean outside. He looked at Jessica, whose eyes were wide with dawning horror, then back at David, who was already scrambling, his fingers flying across the console with a frantic energy that spoke volumes. "What do you mean? Emerging?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it building?" David didn't answer directly. Instead, he slammed his hand on a different panel, bringing up a complex series of schematics. "The energy signature. It's not just radiating outwards anymore. It's localized. It's coalescing. Look at this." He pointed to a rapidly expanding cluster of red on a three-dimensional sonar map, centered directly beneath the Odyssey. "It's drawing power from the ship, from the surrounding water, from the very fabric of this place. It's like a self-assembling construct, but on a scale I've never seen. It's using the signal as a blueprint, a set of instructions to re-engineer matter." Suddenly, the entire deck shuddered violently. A groan echoed through the metal hull, deeper and more resonant than any creak of settling steel. Lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the familiar control room seem alien and threatening. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the ship's core, growing louder, more insistent, like 1,000 tortured souls trying to escape. "The Odyssey is reacting," Michael stated, the obvious fact still shocking. "It's not just a passive vessel anymore. It's part of this." "It always was," David said, his voice strained. "Aris didn't just find the signal. He built the Odyssey to interact with it, to contain it, to study it. Or maybe to feed it." This ship is a massive power conduit, a processing unit. It's not just sending out a signal, it's receiving instructions and then executing them. Another violent lurch sent them all stumbling. A crack appeared in one of the reinforced viewing ports, spiderwebbing outwards from an unseen impact. The ocean outside, usually a serene inky black, was now a maelstrom of churning currents and strange luminous eddies. "We need to see this," Michael commanded, pushing past David towards the main observation deck, a reinforced viewport designed for deep-sea exploration. Jessica was right behind him, followed by David, who was still muttering to himself, trying to decipher the new, terrifying data flooding his screens. They reached the observation deck just as an unholy spectacle began to unfold before them. From the abyssal depths directly beneath the Odyssey, something was rising. It wasn't organic, not a leviathan of the deep. It was geometric. Impossible. Fast. At first, it looked like a shimmering translucent haze, a distortion in the water. But as it ascended, it began to solidify, to coalesce into intricate angular forms. It was colossal, dwarfing the Odyssey, which now seemed like a toy boat bobbing above it. The structure wasn't metallic, nor was it rock. It seemed to be composed of an unknown material, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence that pulsed in sync with the signal's intensifying hum. It was a lattice of impossibly thin, yet incredibly strong-looking struts, interlocking with perfect precision, assembling themselves with a speed that defied all known physics. Segments rotated into place, snapping together with silent, unseen forces. New layers bloomed from existing ones, spreading outwards like a fractal growth pattern. It was a cathedral of light and shadow, alien and profoundly unsettling. As it grew, it seemed to pull at the very water around it, creating swirling vortexes that threatened to tear the Odyssey apart. "It's a construct," Jessica breathed, her voice filled with a mixture of terror and awe. "Not a natural formation, not a creature. It's built. It's building itself," David corrected, his eyes glued to the phenomenon. "The signal isn't just a beacon. It's a master architect." Eris wasn't just observing an anomaly. He stumbled upon a dormant manufacturing process, or an ancient seed of creation. The Odyssey's power, the energy from the hydrothermal vents, Eris's initial signal. It was all the spark, the catalyst Eris spoke of in his logs. He activated it. Michael felt a surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp. "Activated what, David? What is that thing?" The structure continued its relentless ascent, its glow brightening, casting an ethereal phosphorescent light across the ocean floor and up towards the surface. It was now several times the size of the Odyssey, its apex still lost in the gloom above, its base extending far below. It was not a solid mass, but a complex, multi-layered framework, intricate and terrifyingly elegant. And as it grew, the hull of the Odyssey groaned louder, the lights dimmed further, and the ship itself began to tilt, pulled by unseen forces. David pounded a fist on the console. The Odyssey is being integrated. The energy draws aren't just for power. It's using the ship's components, its structure, its very matter to build this thing. It's dissolving, reassembling. We're being consumed. Panic, raw and visceral, began to set in. Michael looked at the expanding structure, then back at David. "Can we stop it? Can we cut the power? Sever the connection?" "I'm trying," David yelled, his fingers a blur. "But the primary power conduits are now part of the structure. It's bypassed our internal systems. It's like trying to unplug a heart from a body that's already grown around it. The signal itself is the control. If we can sever the signal, maybe..." He trailed off, his face grim. "But the source is deep within the Odyssey's core, where we initially found the data logs. It's now the heart of that thing." He pointed to the monstrous structure outside. Jessica, her face pale, pointed to a specific part of the emerging structure. "Look, it's not just random growth. There's a pattern, a focal point, a central chamber or a gateway." Indeed, as the construct reached a certain height, the intricate lattice began to converge, forming a vast, hollow space at its center. Within this space, the light intensified, pulsing with a rhythmic beat that seemed to resonate in their very chests. It wasn't just a structure, it was a machine, and it was powering up. "A gateway," Michael repeated, the word chilling him to the bone. "To where? For what?" David finally accessed a new set of fragmented logs, Eris's last, desperate entries, barely decipherable through the static. His eyes widened in horror as he read. Eris, he didn't just activate it. He was trying to stop it. He called it the architect's hand. He said it was designed to terraform, to re-engineer entire planets, but not for human life. He believed it was dormant, left behind by a precursor civilization. He thought he could study it, contain its energy, but Eris realized too late that the signal wasn't just a broadcast. It was a summoning, and it was summoning something through this gateway. The hum intensified to a deafening roar. The Odyssey groaned again, a sound of tearing metal. The viewing port, already cracked, shattered completely, though the reinforced glass somehow held, distorting the view into a kaleidoscope of terror. Water sprayed in, cold and violent, but the integrity held for now. Summoning what? Jessica screamed over the noise, clutching Michael's arm. David's gaze was fixed on the screen, his face a mask of utter despair. He called it the Harbinger, a seed of consciousness, a directive. He wrote that once the gateway was fully formed, once enough energy was accumulated, the Harbinger would manifest. It wouldn't just re-engineer matter, it would re-engineer life. It would rewrite the very fabric of existence to suit its own purpose. He tried to shut it down, but the architect's hand was already too powerful. He believed the Odyssey was his last hope, a way to contain it, to starve it of power. But he failed. He only fed it. The central chamber of the colossal structure outside began to glow with an incandescent, blinding light. The rhythmic pulse sped up, becoming a frantic, uncontrolled throb. The intricate latticework surrounding it began to vibrate, emitting a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the very bones of the Odyssey, through their own bodies. "It's reaching its critical mass," David shouted, pointing to a rapidly climbing energy readout. "The gateway is opening. The Harbinger. It's coming through." Michael looked at the blinding light, the impossible geometry, the sheer, unimaginable scale of the alien construct. The Odyssey was groaning, tearing itself apart. They were trapped, riding a doomed vessel into an unknown nightmare. "There has to be a way," Michael yelled, his voice raw with desperation. "A way to stop it, before whatever is coming through arrives." David looked at him, his eyes haunted. "There's one last option. One Eris considered a last resort, a suicide mission. If we can't sever the signal, we have to overload it. 'Cause a feedback loop. But it would mean collapsing the entire structure, including the Odyssey. There's no escaping the blast radius." As he spoke, the light in the central chamber flared, impossibly bright. A ripple of energy, visible as a distortion in the water itself, emanated from the gateway. And within that blinding light, something began to take shape. Not a physical form, not at first, but a profound, overwhelming presence. A shift in the very air, a pressure on their minds. It was cold, ancient, and utterly malevolently intelligent. The Harbinger was not just emerging, it was arriving. And it was bringing with it a purpose that threatened to unravel everything they knew. A cold, ancient, and utterly malevolently intelligent presence settled over them. The Harbinger was not just emerging, it was arriving. And it was bringing with it a purpose that threatened to unravel everything they knew. The pressure inside the research vessel Neptune's embrace became unbearable. It wasn't just the physical strain of the deep, but a psychic assault, a crushing weight on their very souls. Lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the bridge into an eerie red emergency glow. Consoles sparked, screens displaying frantic, nonsensical data streams. Outside, the already murky water beyond the viewport seemed to thicken, swirling with impossible colors, depths of purple and black that bled into an iridescent green, like oil on water but alive, pulsing. A low guttural hum vibrated through the ship's hull, a sound that bypassed their ears and resonated directly in their bones. It was the sound of something colossal shifting, something that should not exist. Then the whispers began. Not voices, but a chaotic symphony of thoughts, ancient and alien, flooding their minds. They spoke of hunger, of eons of slumber, of a world left behind and now reclaimed. Captain Miller, his face pale and etched with a fear Michael had never seen, gripped the helm. "What in God's name is happening?" he rasped, his eyes darting to the viewports where the impossible colors intensified. Michael felt a surge of nausea, his mind struggling to process the sheer scale of the entity's presence. He looked at Jessica, who had collapsed to her knees, clutching her head, a low moan escaping her lips. David was frantically hitting keys on his station, but his screens were a kaleidoscope of static. Even Emily, usually so composed, stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the shifting abyss outside, a silent tear tracing a path down her cheek. "It's communicating," Michael whispered, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. "Not with sound, but directly. It's in our heads." He could feel fragments of its consciousness, like shards of ice piercing his own thoughts. It was a consciousness that saw time in geological epochs, life as a fleeting, insignificant spark, and the universe as a playground for its own unfathomable will. The images flashed through his mind. Vast, swirling nebulae collapsing into nascent stars, titanic pressures forming worlds, and then a blackness, an endless void where it had drifted, waiting for a trigger, waiting for a signal. Jessica cried out, a guttural sound of pure terror. The Odyssey. It wasn't just a wreck. It was a prison, a seal, the signal. It wasn't a call for help. It was a breach. Her words were choked, her eyes wide with a horrifying revelation. Michael's blood ran cold. He remembered the strange, intricate carvings, the advanced, alien-like technology they'd found. The Odyssey wasn't a simple deep-sea research vessel. It had been something far more profound, designed with a purpose beyond human comprehension, or perhaps, built by humans who had encountered this entity before, and understood the terrifying necessity of its containment. "Think," Michael urged, forcing himself to focus, to push back against the mental static. If the Odyssey was a prison, then its systems, its core technology, it must hold the key to recontainment. David, shaking off the immediate shock, his face grim, slammed his fist on his console. The energy readings from the wreck, they weren't residual power. They were containment fields. The signal we picked up, the one that led us here, wasn't a distress beacon. It was a resonance cascade, a ripple as the prison began to fail. A horrifying understanding dawned on them. They hadn't stumbled upon a lost ship. They had stumbled upon a cosmic horror's jailbreak. And by investigating, by amplifying the signal, they had become unwitting accomplices in its release. "We have to reverse it," Emily said, her voice surprisingly steady, though her eyes still held a lingering terror. "Whatever it is, if it's been contained once, it can be contained again." The hum intensified, and the Neptune's embrace shuddered violently. Alarms blared, then abruptly silenced, as if the ship's very systems were being overwritten by an external dominant force. Outside, the swirling colors coalesced, forming an impossible structure in the water. Not solid, not gaseous, but a shimmering multi-dimensional construct. It was vast, stretching beyond the limits of their viewports, pulsating with an inner light that defied physics. It was the Harbinger, not a creature in the traditional sense, but a sentient nexus of pure, malevolent energy. "Its core," Jessica gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the holographic map of the Odyssey still struggling to display on a flickering screen. "The central chamber, where Michael found the artifact. That's where the primary containment field originated. The artifact. It's a key, or a conduit." Michael remembered the black, obsidian-like object, humming with an unnatural energy. He had dismissed it as a power source, an ancient piece of technology. But what if it was more? What if it was the very anchor of the containment, now dislodged, disrupting the seal? "David, can you link to the Odyssey's remaining power grid?" Michael demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. "We need to re-establish the containment field. We need to generate a countersignal." David was already moving, his fingers flying across the few responsive panels. "The ship's main systems are failing, but I might be able to hotwire a direct conduit to the Odyssey's core energy signature." "It's a long shot, Michael. We'd be trying to wrestle with something beyond our understanding." "We don't have a choice," Captain Miller interjected, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "If that thing gets to the surface, it's over." The Harbinger's influence intensified. Crew members in other parts of the ship began screaming. Michael heard their terror echo in his own mind, amplified by the entity's presence. Some were collapsing, others thrashing, their faces contorted in silent agony as their minds were overwhelmed. "Emily, get to the medical bay. Try to help them, block it out," Michael ordered, knowing it was a near impossible task. Emily nodded, her jaw set, and hurried out of the bridge, disappearing into the blood-red gloom. "Jessica, analyze the data from the Odyssey's core. Any schematics, any warnings, anything that tells us how to activate this seal." Michael turned back to David. Can you reroute our main power to feed into the Odyssey's core? Through the artifact? It's a massive power drain, Michael. It'll fry our systems, maybe even overload the reactor. David shouted over the rising hum. Do it, Michael commanded. We need to generate a pulse. A focused energy burst to resonate with the original containment frequency. If the artifact is the key, we need to charge it, then release it. Jessica, her eyes still wide with fear, had pulled up a damaged schematic. Here, the central chamber has a resonance chamber. It amplifies and focuses the containment field. The artifact, it's designed to interface with it. Suddenly, the Harbinger's presence sharpened, focusing its malevolent intelligence directly on them. A voice ancient and vast, echoed in their minds, not in words but in pure concept. Asterisk fools. You merely prolong the inevitable. The cycle has begun. I have awakened. This realm is mine. Asterisk. The ship groaned, metal screeching as if under immense pressure. Rivets popped, water began to spray from hairline cracks in the bulkheads. The research vessel was tearing itself apart, not from the deep, but from the entity's sheer will. David now, Michael yelled, grabbing a spare emergency axe. If that thing gets a full hold of the ship, we're done. He knew what he had to do. He had to go back to the Odyssey's core chamber, to the artifact. I can give you a window, Michael, maybe 5 minutes before the Neptune's embrace loses structural integrity. David yelled back, his fingers a blur over the console. I'll try to keep the power flowing to the Odyssey's core chamber. You have to place the artifact back, charge it, and activate the resonance. Captain Miller, prepare for emergency ascent protocols, but don't initiate until I give the word, Michael said, his voice grim. If this works, we need to get out of here before the recontainment implodes everything. Aye, Michael, Miller replied, his face a mask of grim determination. Michael didn't wait. He sprinted through the flickering corridors, the screams of the crew still echoing in his mind, the Harbinger's whispers growing louder, more insidious. He felt its probing tendrils trying to seize his thoughts, to break his will. He fought it, focusing on Jessica's words, on David's frantic work, on the desperate hope of salvation. He reached the airlock leading to the Odyssey's breached hull. The pressure was immense, the water outside a swirling vortex of impossible colors. With a grunt, he forced the manual override, the heavy door hissing open. The light from his helmet beam cut through the alien gloom as he entered the ancient wreck. The Odyssey's core chamber was worse than before. The containment field was failing completely. Tendrils of pure, dark energy pulsed from the central pedestal where the artifact had once rested, now reaching out, grasping, trying to pull him in. The air shimmered, thick with a nauseating energy. He saw the artifact, still on the floor where he'd dropped it earlier. He lunged, snatching it up. It pulsed with a cold, malevolent heat, fighting him, trying to resist its return. Asterisk, do not resist. Join. Become. The void hungers. Asterisk, the Harbinger's voice filled his skull, a symphony of cosmic dread. Michael fought through the psychic assault, his teeth gritted. He could feel his own mind fraying, the edges of his sanity dissolving. He staggered towards the central pedestal, its surfaces now glowing with a faint, sickly green light. He jammed the artifact back into its slot. It clicked, a dull, resonant sound that vibrated through the chamber. Immediately, the green light intensified, surging through the pedestal, and then a powerful hum began. Not the Harbinger's oppressive hum, but a clear, resonant frequency growing in power. David now, Michael screamed into his calm, though he wasn't sure if his voice was even his own anymore, or if David could hear him over the mental din. Full power. Back on the Neptune's embrace, David grunted, his face bathed in the red emergency light. Michael, I'm overloading the main reactor. This is it. He slammed his hand down on the final activation sequence. A blinding white light erupted from the Odyssey's core chamber, a pure, focused beam of energy that shot through the water, piercing the impossible, multidimensional construct of the Harbinger. The entity recoiled, its vast, swirling form shuddering violently. The whispers in Michael's mind became screams of pure, unadulterated rage and anguish. The white light intensified, forming a containment sphere around the Harbinger, pushing it back, compressing it, sealing it. The impossible colors outside the Neptune's embrace began to recede, replaced by the familiar, terrifying blackness of the deep. The psychic pressure eased, though a lingering echo of the Harbinger's presence remained, a scar on their collective consciousness. Michael felt a surge of exhaustion, his body slumping against the pedestal as the white light pulsed, then slowly, steadily began to dim, receding back into the artifact and the Odyssey's core. The ancient wreck shuddered, groaned, and then with a final deep tremor settled. The signal that had woken the Harbinger was reversed. The breach was sealed. "Michael, do you read me?" It was Captain Miller's voice, strained but clear through the comms. "I read you, Captain," Michael gasped, picking himself up, his limbs heavy. It's contained. Get us out of here. Now." The Neptune's embrace began its emergency ascent, slowly at first, then gaining speed, leaving the resealed tomb of the Odyssey and its cosmic prisoner behind. As they broke the surface hours later, under a sky streaked with the first hints of dawn, the world felt different. The air tasted cleaner, the sunlight brighter, but it was all tinged with a profound, unsettling knowledge. They had faced something ancient, something that defied comprehension, and they had survived. But they were irrevocably changed. The Harbinger was still there, deep beneath the waves, dormant once more but never truly gone. The ocean, once a symbol of exploration and mystery, was now a veil, hiding a truth so terrifying that it could shatter humanity's perception of its place in the universe. The signal from the wreck of the Odyssey had been answered, and in that answer, they had glimpsed the true, unfathomable horror that lay waiting in the abyssal darkness, a silent, patient intelligence that would one day, inevitably, awaken again. And the world would never truly be safe.